Welcome, brothers and sisters in Christ and YouTube visitors. Welcome to another edition of Around the World News. All right, let's get right into tonight's edition. Syria's military launched a new assault on May 9th of this year, aimed at reasserting its authority in eastern Syria, battling U.S.-backed opposition fighters in the remote desert there, or rather near the borders with Iraq and Jordan. United States and Jordanian forces are massing on Jordan's border for a likely invasion of Syria. The hacktivist group Anonymous has released a chilling new video urging people across the globe to prepare for World War III as the U.S. and North Korea continue to move strategic pieces into place for battle. A North Korean defector says war is now unavoidable. North Korea could be planning an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, strike on the United States with 2 satellites already orbiting above the Earth, an expert claimed. China's latest missile can sink a U.S. aircraft carrier. China is amassing anti-warship missiles. Texas has become the 11th state officially to join an effort to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government by amending the U.S. Constitution. The Pew Research Center found that only 20% of Americans trust their government to do what is right. Only 20%. Oh, I forgot to add. To do what is right always or most of the time. All right. This is what happens when a people institutionalize a thief with an assassin complex to rule over them. Government is force, pure and simple, forcing people to do things against their will under threat of physical violence, incarceration, and or financial penalty. When government takes the property of some and gives it to others, that's welfare, particularly to buy votes, government has become an intimidating mafia of thieves. Life equals time equals energy equals work equals money equals property equals taxes. The Mexican Army says its the Mexican Army says its fight against surging opium production that feeds U.S. demand is increasingly complicated by the rise of smaller gangs disputing wild, ungoverned lands planted with ever stronger poppy strains. Europe's top physics lab, CERN, that's C-E-R-N, launched its newest particle accelerator on May the 9th, billed as a key step towards future experiments that could unlock the universe's greatest mysteries. The LINAC 4 accelerator will by 2021 be connected to CERN's Large Hadron Collider, the world's most powerful proton smasher. When the economy goes bad, the elderly, children, women, the handicapped, animals, and the environment are the first to suffer. Amidst Venezuela's economic chaos, infant mortality is up 30%, and women dying during childbirth are up 65%. The WHO, the World Health Organization, reported 2,022 suspected cases of cholera in war-torn Yemen. Almost 1/3 of newly approved drugs in the United States have a safety issue. All right. And now, for a couple of articles I should draw to your attention. President Donald Trump, has had experience with bankruptcy. This will prove to be useful as his tax plan, if approved by Congress, will push the U.S. ever closer to financial disaster. The 2016 U.S. trade balance deficit was over $500 billion. The national debt is $19.9 trillion, with an ever-increasing budget deficit and a debt-to-GDP ratio of 105%. The retail sector situation is apocalyptic and will probably worsen in the near future. Given these fundamentals, it's only to be expected that the U.S. dollar will continue its downward path. However, as prominent economists have noted, the use of the dollar as an international reserve currency and the demand for dollars because of various reasons, petrodollars, safe haven, have resulted in the continued strength of the greenback. In this context, the current euphoria on Wall Street recalls the 1929 crash and the buoyant mood before the downturn in 2000. The sluggish recovery that began in March 2009 has been accompanied by a record surge in equity prices that has become the second longest bull cycle in history. With several economic indicators showing negative signs, it is only to be expected that a correction, if not a real crash, in stock prices is to be expected before long, notwithstanding the usual Wall Street hype. If confidence in the U.S. economy falters, the dollar could easily lose 50% of its value on forex markets. For this to happen, a combination of increasing federal debt, continued huge negative trade balance deficits, and a stock market crash altogether might suffice. The catalyst could be rising interest rates, as the Fed presently planning more increases in 2017. This has been sufficient in the past. U.S. debt held by foreign countries amounts to $5.9 trillion. Should any of these creditors decide that the time has come to convert their dollars into their local currency, panic could ensue. I think it's supposed to be could ensue. Anyway, that would have far-reaching negative consequences on the global economy. China and Russia are already preparing a dollar alternative. Sell dollar stocks as the prices are at record highs. With the dollar as strong as it is going to become, it would also be wise to take advantage of the high dollar to buy local currencies. Even the euro would be an alternative if there is a dollar crash. Forex traders should be careful about entering into long positions on the US dollar. Tempus fugit in time decay is an enemy. So writes Walter Snyder in an article titled "The Dollar Crash" in WWS Swiss Financial Consulting essay. Now that's dated May the 4th. And finally, got a good article here by Doug Casey you might want to hear. But first, let's get into the activistpost.com puts out an article here. Ever wonder why nothing ever happens? Ever changes, rather? 2 words. Controlled opposition. Controlled opposition is counterintelligence propaganda and is carried out today legally under the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. It's all an act, and the act is part and parcel of social engineering. The systematic molding and brainwashing of the individual mind to conform to groupthink and one preferred ideology. Controlled opposition turns a captive audience into a captured herd with an accepted institutionalized message. Living in the institutionalized system that we do means that one small group can infiltrate grassroots organizations to change the perception of reality for all. By programming through the educational system and the media, an entire nation can be demoralized within a span of 1 generation or 15 to 20 years. Controlled opposition exists to subvert and undermine the truth movement, to protect the establishment. That is the deep state, the global elite. When truth is subverted, new information cannot be accepted or believed, even if evidence to the contrary is presented, that is, until the system crashes. As experienced by many under the Marxist, Leninist, Communist Soviet regime, those who do not fall in line, those who revolt against the message, in other words, the dissidents who promote equality, true equality under law, are squashed. Despite living in the age of information, humanity has reached a state of powerlessness, unable to defend itself, the family, the community, or the country. The appearance of freedom is illusion, where both sides of a debate are controlled at the top. Any natural disaster or act of terrorism becomes an opportunity for opportunists to remove more freedoms. The establishment sets up the fall by framing the debate as pro versus anti. So writes Roseanne Lindsay in Controlled Opposition and the Truth Movement, found at activistpost.com, dated May 9th. All right? And finally, our last article by Mr. Doug Casey, the financial guru and best-selling author of Crisis Investing. Things changed with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Before that, the U.S. used gold coinage for money. The dollar was just a name for 1/20th of an ounce of gold. That is what the dollar was. Paper dollars were just receipts for gold on deposit in the Treasury. The income tax, enacted the same year, threw more sand in the gears of civilization. The world was much freer before the events of 1913 and 1914, which acted to put the state at the center of everything. The Fed and the income tax are both disastrous and unnecessary things, enemy of the common man in every way. They're the main reasons why the average American standard of living has been dropping since the early 1970s. In fact, were it not for these things and the immense amount of capital destroyed during the numerous wars of the last 100 years, I expect we'd have already colonized the moon and stars, or rather Mars. Not the stars, Mars. But I want to re-emphasize that the science, the technology, and all the wonderful toys we have are not the essence of Western civilization. They're consequences of individualism, capitalism, rational thought, and personal freedom. It's critical not to confuse cause and effect. All the world's governments and central banks share a common philosophy which drives these policies. They believe that you create economic activity by stimulating demand. And you stimulate demand by printing money. And of course, it's true, in a way, roughly the same way a counterfeiter can stimulate a local economy. Unfortunately, they ignore that and completely ignore that the way a person or society becomes wealthy is by producing more than they consume and saving the difference. Very good. That difference, savings, is how you create capital. Without capital, you're reduced to subsistence, scratching at the earth with a stick. These people think that by inflating, which is to say destroying the currency, they can create prosperity. But what they're really doing is destroying capital. And when people don't save, they can't build capital, and the vicious cycle goes on. This is destructive for civilization itself in both the long term and short term. The more paper money, the more credit they create, the more society focuses on finance as opposed to production. It's why there are many times more people studying finance than science. The focus is increasingly on speculation, not production. Financial engineering, not mechanical, electrical, or chemical engineering. And lots of laws and regulations to keep the unstable structure from collapsing. Negative interest rates discourage savings. Once again, saving is what builds capital. Without capital, you wind up as an empty shell. Rome in 450 AD, or Detroit today. Lots of wonderful but empty buildings and no economic activity. Worse, it forces people to desperately put their money in all manner of idiotic speculations in an effort to stay ahead of inflation. They wind up chasing the bubbles the funny money creates. Let me re-emphasize something. In order for science and technology to advance, you need capital. Where does capital come from? It comes from people producing more than they consume and saving the difference. Debt, on the other hand, means you're living above your means. Isn't this what I've been talking about in some of my videos? You need to stay out of debt, cut down those credit cards, cut them in half, and start living beyond or below your income, okay? Get a second job if you have to. Start a business if you have to. Acquire income-producing assets. And stop buying luxury vacations and automobiles and going deeper into debt. Save up your money and buy a car. You should be incidentally, you should put a money aside for car repairs and a car replacement fund. Call it a car replacement fund. Put $150 a month aside so that in 5 years you can buy another car. Because a lot of the modern cars, they just don't last that long. They're not like the old cars that were built in the 60s and 70s. They were made out of steel. Everything's made out of fiberglass or plastic today. Zero and negative interest rate policies and the creation of money out of nowhere are actually destructive of civilization itself. It makes the average guy feel he's not in control of his own destiny. He starts believing that the state or luck or Allah will provide for him. That attitude is typical of people from backward parts of the world, not Western civilization. 100 years ago, the richest people in the country, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies and such, made their money creating industries that actually made stuff. Now, the richest people in the country just shuffle money around. They get rich because they're close to the government, and the hydrant of currency materialized by the Federal Reserve. I'd say it's a sign that society in the United States has become quite degraded. The world revolves much less around actual production, but around guessing the direction of financial markets. In other words, speculating in the stock and bond market and commodities. Negative interest rates are creating bubbles and will eventually result in an economic collapse. I believe the next step in their idiotic plan is to abolish cash. Decades ago, they got rid of gold coinage, which used to circulate day to day in people's pockets. Then, they got rid of silver coinage. Now they're planning to get rid of cash altogether. So you won't even have euros or dollars or pounds in your wallet anymore, or if you do, it will only be very small denominations as they get rid of the $500 bills, the $100 bills, the $50 bills. Everything else is going to have to be done through electronic payment processing. This is a huge disaster for the average person. Absolutely everything that you buy or sell, other than perhaps a candy bar or a hamburger, is going to have to go through the banking system. Thus, the government will be able to monitor every transaction and payment. Financial privacy, even what's left of it today, will literally cease to exist. So writes Doug Casey, an atheistic libertarian, in an article titled "The End of Western Civilization," found in Casey Daily Dispatch, dated May the 6th. Yeah, you see, the government wants total control. That's what a totalitarian regime is all about. Total control over the banking system, over finances. All right? Over Hollywood, over the media, mass media. So you need to get your freedom. You need to acquire perhaps some more wealth. Although the Apostle Paul said having food and clothing therewith to be content. But you know, it's not enough to just have food and clothing anymore, or so it would seem. You know, the dollar just doesn't buy what it used to. But having said that, how much wealth do you really need? Well, we're not going to talk about that right now. You don't need a whole lot, and unless you plan on stopping work. If you plan on stopping working and retiring at 65, yeah, you need a lot of money. Most people by the age of 65, at least 36%, are going to have to keep working. Only 1% will be considered rich, financially independent. 4% will be very well off. You know, 5% will be dead. And a large percentage will be poor, considered poor. Well, most Americans are wealthy compared to the average income of the world citizen, of the average person in the world. You know, when you can take into consideration all the poor countries, you're pretty rich if you're watching this and you live in America. But you need to get out of debt. The Apostle Paul, under an inspiration of the Holy Spirit, says, "Owe no man anything but love." Owe no man anything but love. Well, I don't know. I think the average American owes about $30-some-odd thousand, which is almost about what his average income is per year. Not a good situation. All right. Well, that wraps it up for Around the World News. I hope you enjoyed this. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video. Subscribe if this is your first time visiting this channel. And please do share this video with others. Thank you very much. Until we meet again.